Can you hear me? All right. I come to tell you all one story, but I'm going to end up telling you another for reasons that I think make sense to y'all by the time I'm done. This is a story about how I got started working on the forthcoming book, A Season on the Backside of the Fairgrounds, and here it goes. So I just started working for the Daily Racing Form when my editor called. This was, he said, I've got an odd story. I was a month into the job, and almost every story was some degree of odd to me. I felt like a child pretending to be grown, and I was still having trouble deciphering what it was trainers and jockeys were telling me when I went to ask them questions. Every day began with the editor, Jim Dunleavy, asking me, how many words do you want? And every time he asked, I would get a sinking feeling. How many do I want? I want no words. I want to go home and quit pretending to be a grown-up. The minimum budget was 1,025 words, 425 words about the 9th race, and 600 words about some training that was happening, maybe a big horse arriving, or a jockey starting to come on or dissipate. I had taken the job after being boosted for it by Marcus Hirsch, a writer for the Racing Form. He got tired of bringing his family down every winter from Chicago to New Orleans. I find it unbelievable, but he got tired of, he wanted New Orleans, he wanted to leave me New Orleans and get Chicago winters. And so I'd been boosted for the job, and I'd grown up loving racing with my family, equally enthralled by the horse race and the chaotic beauty of the gambling. So but that's not enough, of course, to be a Racing Form writer. And so, and I'd really never been on the same side of a fence as a horse before, which seems like you would need to do that. But I went back to see Ralph Nix about a horse he was running against his dad, Morris Nix. I had the story all framed out in my mind, you know, father versus son, son versus father. And so I walk into the barn and I say, and just as I'm about to say Mr. Nix, he grabs me by right here, by the mic, not by the microphone, but by the shirt, and he throws me into his office just before I was headbutted by his horse coming around the corner. So you can see how green I was and how little I knew about horse racing. I had to start doing that work of earning the trust. So getting people to talk to me was hard work. Race trackers were rightfully leery of the new guy, and most carried a reasonable amount of antagonism toward media in general. One false word about a horse might get a horse moved out of a barn. Some mishandled sentences about a jockey's disappointing ride might lose them future mounts. So I was welcomed into each barn with courtesy and caution, and I was working to earn a rapport. So back to my editor. That day's story was indeed novel. Martin Brown was a 63-year-old jockey who was beginning to have success again after not riding for 25 years. I went to meet him, and we got to talking, and rather than agonizing to pull a few quotes out to fill a story, Martin answered my first question with a dozen paragraphs. And each story of a particular job or a particular horse reminded him of how he got into that job or how he got onto that horse, and so his life began to unfold in reverse, in stops and starts. And pretty soon a picture started to take shape in my mind. Before an hour had gone, he was talking about his beginning as a jockey at 9 years old in Opelousas, Louisiana, racing in match races at the top of a rice field, what they call the headlands. They would turn the quarter horses around and send them flying with two little boys struggling to stay on and steer. Turn and burn, Martin called it, from the headland to the promised land. The story was wild and beautiful and far too much to fit into my 600-word budget, but I typed up what I could. Breaking through Jim Crow to become a jockey, the injuries, and the unlikely return to the life of a jockey. As I worked through 3 years of my grown-up job, the idea of another kind of writing about the track appeared to me. Each time I saw Martin, I wanted to hear more of his story, and every time I ducked into a barn to talk to a trainer about how the training was coming or the big horse was coming into a race, I'd see a gang of people, grooms, hot walkers, exercise riders, acupuncturists, assistants, and always jockey agents, all of them doing the unseen work that made the barn function, all the work that makes the minute and a half of racing seem ethereal. After 3 years, when I finally felt no longer like a fake grown-up, I quit the Daily Racing Form and went backside to ask the rest of the track about their stories and to get people on the backside to explain about the lives that were mostly invisible to the rest of New Orleans. I had been doing this kind of work for 7 years for the Neighborhood Story Project, and I enlisted photographer Aubrey Edwards to help me document the lives of people living on the backside. And the result is coming to a bookshelf near you in March. This is the story I wrote about Martin that day when I only had 600 words. So It's called Not Too Late to Get Back into the Saddle by Abram Himelstein in New Orleans. At an age when most jockeys are retired or getting close, Martin Brown is coming into his own. At 63, Brown is coming off his best year as a jockey, and he's begun 2008 with 2 victories in 2 weeks. Born in La Pelouse, Louisiana in 1944, Brown has spent his whole life working with racehorses in many different capacities. He rode match races around Acadiana from 8 to 17, then left high school in 1962 and came to the fairgrounds. I came to the racetrack to be a jockey. I was following the train of Kelly Broussard and Nelson Menard, 2 jockeys from Acadiana, but then I got to the fairgrounds and there weren't any black jockeys. Brown found work at the fairgrounds eventually, working as an exercise rider and rubbing horses for trainer Jerry Smith. His time as an exercise rider included working with Ask the Fair, who won the Louisiana Derby in 1967, finished second in the Arkansas Derby, and then came here to Churchill Downs, finished a good 5th in the Kentucky Derby. It was during one of these trips to Kentucky that Brown made several discoveries that helped his journey towards becoming a jockey. When I got to Churchill, that's when I discovered that there was many black riders as there were. I started doing library work and meeting other black jockeys. During this trip, he met L.J. DeRosso, a standout African-American jockey in Omaha. He dominated things around Omaha, Brown said. He once won 22 races in 3 days. It's because of him as a tribute that I wear white gloves. Brown got his first experience as a jockey in Detroit in 1968, riding for Jerry Smith. He worked as an exercise rider and occasionally as a jockey through the 70s. His race was more of an issue at some tracks than at others. When Spanky Broussard named him as the jockey for a filly named Doorstep Waif in Arlington in 1972, Broussard was asked pointedly and repeatedly by the stewards if he really intended to name Brown as the jockey. After being asked 3 times, Spanky said, "Judge, I believe Lincoln ended slavery days. Brown won on that filly, Doorstep Waif." He was injured while exercise riding in 1980 when a horse stepped on his chest and fractured his collarbone. While rehabilitating from the injury, he began pony riding for his brother Wilbert and developed a pony riding business called B&B, named after the grocery run he would make at quitting time for beer and boudin. With the pony business going strong, Brown didn't return to jockeying until 2005, a 25-year hiatus. In 2004, he met a younger exercise rider, Sherelle Smith, and he showed her how to eat, train, and ride. In the process, he began to eat and train alongside of her. And when she moved to New York, he found himself in good enough shape to be a jockey again. When she and I split up, I said to myself, if I lose 8 pounds, I can be back in this. I have the physical fitness to compete with those younger riders. They've got their youth, and I've got my wisdom. God gives you both, but not at the same time. His comeback began with 19 races in 2005 and no victories, and then things began to pick up. In 2007, he had 9 wins and mounts earning more than $260,000, and Brown began 2008 strongly, entering Sunday racing with 2 wins and 2 seconds from 24 mounts. His friendship and partnerships from a lifetime on the track still form the basis of his business, with people he has known since riding matches in Acadiana employing him both as an exercise rider and jockey. Spanky says he's the best at breezing horses. Nobody at the track works harder than Martin Brown. I asked Martin about it. A lot of people looked at me and said I was too old, said Brown, but everything they said I couldn't do, I've done it. That was the story I filed that day. And like I said, I've gotten deeper into the backside, or as assistant trainer Evan Downing used to say, the backside's a large family. We can be dysfunctional at times, but we are family. Spanky passed on a few years after I wrote this story, and Martin Brown would like you to know that he's very much with us and has just published a book of his own called From the Headlands to the Promised Land. But I especially wanted to tell this story now because I very much needed to hear this story of change and of overcoming of hatred on this week, this year, and especially today, with Maurice Stollard being buried just down the road from us this morning. I need to remember that change is possible when we do the hard work of making change. And right here for today, I want to salute Spanky Broussard and Martin Brown. Thank you, Spanky. Thank you, Martin. Thank you to all of us who make change possible. And thank you all for your time.